Welcome to the Activate World podcast, a series on how business leaders have more power to solve societal issues than any elected official. We explore business activism with substance and depth of thought. From time to time, we do bonus episodes. Here we continue the conversation with Professor Jennifer Peterson from the University of Virginia. Professor Peterson, you mentioned that there's a few characters that leverage radio in a new way to gather an audience. Can you give us a sense of one of those characters and how they used radio to amplify their voice?
My favorite for the current moment is Reverend Bob Shuler, who is sometimes known as Fighting Bob Shuler, who is a preacher. He's actually a Texas preacher who moved to Los Angeles. And for a reason that those of us around today and know Los Angeles today might think is funny, is that he thought it was one of the purer places in the United States where there are still, good, strong Christian values. So he moved to Los Angeles to, speak to and inculcate these good, strong Christian values in Americana. So he spoke about Los Angeles in a way that's opposite, I think, to its media reputation today. So he starts broadcasting Trinity radio station. And like a lot of the other radio personalities of the day and people who took advantage of the new medium in all meanings of that word, like Father Coughlin, like Doc Brinkley, Huey Long, he started out, or like many of those people, he started out using radio simply to, spread his message, spread his religious message. His particular gospel was, he was Protestant, so he was very moralistic. He was anti-corruption, gambling, a number of other cultural vices. He had a lot of anti-Catholic Church messages. He railed a lot against the Catholic Church, against local politicians. He was quite anti-Semitic as well. So he had a kind of this ideology he was espousing. But he also realized he had reached a large audience and that that this was a means of amassing power. And I think he and a number of these other early radio demagogues began to sort of become addicted to or interested in using radio as a means to get power and money as much as or more than an ideological outlet. And I think there's a lot of parallels between, say, Alex Jones today and some of these other guys in the way that they might have started with a purely kind of ideological or perhaps fame desire, but they also then begin to see, they become businesses in a sense, or and use this as sort of this, as a way of making lots and lots of money off of people. And so, for example, in the case of Reverend Shuler, he would do things like, as he realized that lots of people were listening to him and really responding to him, he would do things like say, I've got a secret on somebody out there and I know what you did. It may have been an allegation. It was either corruption or of adultery. And he said, and if you don't send me $100, I'm going to release your name. Well, lots of people wrote in giving him $100. And similarly, like Father Coughlin would say occasionally, he made a lot of money. He built a wonderful new church for himself. But every once in a while, he'd say, I'm running out of money and I'm going to have to quit spreading my good word. And people would send him tons of money. So these guys are asking people to send in their hard-earned cash to them. So Reverend Shuler would take these cash contributions and keep them for himself. And in a sense, this was part of his downfall. When the FRC at the time, Federal Radio Commission, which is a precursor to the FCC, denied him the renewal of a license, and part of the reason that they did this is he was, making all kinds of allegations about corruption in the local government and courts, and in addition to anti-Semitism. So they're denying him a license and he takes him to court. And this is actually one of the first free speech cases in radio. And in the end, the FRC, the courts decide for the FRC, and they decide for the FRC because they say that Shuler is making use of the public airwaves for private profit, and that he's really not engaged in the public interest or public good because all that he's really interested in is his own fame and his own money. So this is part of how he was shut down, was partly because of a very different regulatory environment, but also a different understanding of public, private, and the social role of media at the time.
It sounds like he was more successful than Father Coughlin in getting that initial radio license. So he wasn't as controversial in the beginning?
Well, I think actually Father Coughlin had a longer and more had a longer career and was in many ways more successful. Like Father Coughlin first was on network radio, then he got his own radio station. He was then denied a license and denied syndication, but he was able to go through more iterations. Bob Shuler was a more short-lived radio personality and didn't really, after he was denied his radio license renewal, I don't think he was ever really had the same kind of public reach again. I think he continued preaching to a physical congregation in Los Angeles, but that really sort of was the end of his national or regional career. He was interesting in the way that he would just make stuff up. I mean, he would just make stuff up and he would just say it with no sense of consequence, of having any kind of accountability or consequence. And also that lack of accountability, I think, was one of the hallmarks of early radio. And I think it became harder to do that as radio stations actually became part of larger corporate chains, like NBC, CBS, where you had a parent company that you were part of the face of. So there was more accountability in those places. So as radio became institutionalized in a number of ways, the public came to expect certain norms, like telling the truth on the air, and also as the actual radio shows and programming were embedded within institutional structures.
The other side of that is the rise of governmental institutions to help regulate that as well.
And they've taken on the regulatory agencies have had very different understandings of their role in different eras. And in the 1930s and 1940s, we did have a more active regulatory agency. They saw their job as doing more to establish a fair playing field in a sense, whereas now there's been, we're in a different phase of regulation where the regulatory agencies are a lot more hands-off.
Thank you, Professor Peterson, for sharing that story. Listeners, follow us on social media and keep up to date on our latest giveaways and news. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues about the Activate World podcast. Encourage them to subscribe, listen, and share from their favorite podcast platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, and others. Let us know how we're doing by leaving a review. Your reviews mean a lot to us. Activate World is a team endeavor. Special thanks to Kayla Waldstein and Kent Nutt. Music by Jason Goodyear. For Activate World, I'm John Mertz.